I would always start first and foremost with what their goals are what are their personal and professional goals? What do they want to get out of this? What are the economic factors that's going to be weighted in a certain way? What is the floor versus what is the ceiling on a potential partnership, depending on if I go with the strategic, the likely ceiling for that is much lower, but the floor is much higher than going with a private equity.
Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffarker. Before we get started, if you enjoy this show, I have a favor to ask. Please like, subscribe, or even better, leave a review wherever you enjoy listening. It'll help the show become more visible to more people. And thank you very much. Really appreciate you listening. Today, we're excited to welcome Ryan Mingus, a prominent figure in the dental M&A space. As the managing director of mergers and acquisitions at Tusk Partners, Ryan has extensive experience advising dental practices on sell-side partnerships and DSO transactions. His expertise has helped countless dental professionals navigate complex deals while ensuring they achieve their long-term goals. Ryan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
Doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk to your audience here. It's nice to be part of your audience via publications, but this is certainly a treat for me and looking forward, kind of kicking off 2025, getting out there.
Yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. I think, to start, let's discuss your career journey a little bit. You've been at the forefront of the dental M&A space at Tusk for over 5 years now, at Dental, I think, for over a decade. What initially drew you to the dental industry, and how did you find your way into M&A?
So I started my career in healthcare in a business development capacity. I had a finance background and went to college, ultimately with the goal of going to Wall Street and going the kind of investment banking route. But 2008 was not the greatest time to graduate and move to New York City and work on Wall Street. But I did have a mother who was an entrepreneur in the healthcare space. So she owned a very large dietetic consulting business that catered to nursing homes, correctional facilities, kind of any privately owned business that couldn't afford a full-time dietitian. She had a network of folks that worked for her. So, kind of seeing her as an entrepreneur in the healthcare space, was always exposed to that, and ultimately started my career in the hospital space, both in a business development and a strategy capacity. And then after getting my MBA in corporate finance, then I actually got into the M&A side of healthcare. So my clients were large hospital systems that were looking to acquire and integrate ambulatory surgery centers, privately owned, and then acquire them and integrate them into their healthcare system. So I got to see the tail end of ambulatory surgery center consolidation and got some exposure to the world of dentistry. The business I worked for, the consulting firm, was actually owned by a private equity company called Griffin Investors, which is the primary investor in Smile Brands. So just kind of through all of that, got some exposure. And then when I actually started digging in, I recognized that kind of dentistry was in early innings at the time, compared to that of ambulatory surgery center. And I felt like I could take what I learned in the later stages of ASC consolidation and apply it to the dental world. And that's really kind of what interested me into it, and then got connected with Kevin Cumbus, and it kind of was a good marriage of my background at the time, having kind of entered into dental through a management consulting gig at Align Technology.
Yeah, so you've seen a lot of change over the past 5 years. I think, this from 2020 to now, through COVID, through some really, really strong valuations that were taking place, some really aggressive M&A, and then maybe slowing down with the increase in interest rates and the fact that money was not so inexpensive any longer. What is kind of your outlook right now as you enter into 2025? Are you bullish on the opportunities that are in the marketplace? Do you think this is a seller's market, a buyer's market? Neither? Kind of share a little bit of your overall perspective of where we are today.
Yeah, I don't think I would classify it as a buyer or a seller's market. It's certainly, not in a seller's favor when it comes to the activity on the buy side, the amount of offers we're getting for any given deal, and then the constraints that the buyers are currently facing from an interest rate environment and just a more difficult operating environment for them. So they don't have a lot of, great near-term success with respect to same-store sales growth, which is really what lenders want to see in order to get excited about allowing these DSOs to cut very large checks for assets. So, but that being said, we always say that every one of our clients is looking for something unique, and they're in a unique situation. So, depending on where they're at in their life and their retirement planning, or where their business is at, and with respect to whether they've hit a ceiling and they just need somebody to help take them to the next level, everybody's looking for something differently. Everybody has a different time horizon. And then with that being said, every buyer is in a different space within their own cycle. And a specific asset today might look one way to them, but 6 months from now or 6 months ago, it would look very different. And the price that they were willing to put on that business could be vastly different, over a 12-month period, depending on a lot of different factors. So that being said, I think the market is kind of settling in with respect to where the new interest rates ultimately might be, what the new normal might be, and as such, there's still a bit of a spread between the bid and the ask of what sellers want. If they went into building a business 10 years ago to get a 12x for their business, is that really going to be out there? Maybe, but it's less likely than it would have been, and to your reference, kind of 2019, 2021 numbers, pre and post COVID.
So you mentioned some different scenarios related to, you may have an owner that, they're just looking to exit. You may have somebody that has reached a cap and they're looking for somebody to take them to the next level. There's all sorts of different situations that dental practices find themselves in. And then there's obviously different buyers that look for those different scenarios. Maybe somebody is an acquirer of practices that need a turnaround, and they're looking for like a low cost practice that they're going to put a lot of work into. They've got a formula that's going to then, create a lot of value in the future. Is there any type of profile right now that you would say has a higher degree of success selling? And what would that be?
So I'll draw a picture of a perfect asset in the eyes of a growing DSO that's looking to grow through M&A strategy, less so kind of that turnaround model. But let's go with more of where valuations are the highest. I'll draw a picture for a business like that. It's generally a business that has a diversification of revenue across multiple providers. There's not any one key doctor or specialty within that multi-specialty practice that's driving the majority of the revenue. So diversification of providers, a willingness on behalf of the providers to work post-close for some period of time. So commitment to maintaining the revenues that they're basing their valuation on. Additionally, a recent track record of growth. It doesn't have to be exponential, but just a growing business in the operating environment that folks faced in 23 and 24. If you've grown in that environment, same store, same locations, if you're multiple locations on an EBITDA basis, then you're in some pretty rare air. And if I'm a buyer, I want to partner with somebody that navigated that environment well. Additionally, I would say from a willingness of a structure to take an offer that creates alignment with both parties post-close through equity. I would say, the more willing a seller is to roll equity, the better. And then with respect to, there are certain geographies that are, a premium is being sought right now. So if you talk, we like to kind of reference football analogies, SEC, ACC country, with, obviously the SEC going as far west as Texas these days, with Texas and Oklahoma coming in. Those markets are really hot. Mid-Atlantic, is pretty warm. And I would say that those geographies matter because the macro environment of those geographies is favorable, right? They're growing patient base, growing populations. A lot of doctors want to work there. And, with all of those factors, if I'm a buyer, it's a lower risk investment. So really the businesses that are fetching the greatest premiums are the ones with the lowest risk profile in the eyes of the buyers, both on a macro and a micro within the business level. So if you're able to ring the bell on those elements and be a willing partner post-close for a meaningful amount of time, then that business is going to fetch a premium valuation versus somebody that is perhaps just looking to, sell their business and have a nice glide path into retirement. Those businesses are still very nice and are being acquired on a regular basis. They're just not fetching quite that premium multiple that maybe somebody would have paid for them or, a couple of years ago.
Now, what does the market look like today? So you can have independent practices that are seeking to sell to a DSO. You could have doctor-owned groups that have kind of become an emerging organization with multiple practices that may be seeking either private equity or to sell to a DSO. How do those two scenarios vary? And does Tusk work with securing private equity funding as well, or is it predominantly transactions, DSO acquiring practices?
Yeah, great question. There's certainly differentiators in the kind of client profile we represent, and we represent anywhere between, call it 15 million of EBITDA, which is that doctor-founded partner model, but usually multiple partners involved, looking to potentially be that next private equity platform and engage Tusk to specifically go out and seek a financial sponsor. Now, we ultimately do want to bring in strategic existing platforms as well, because they're going to look at the business through a very different lens, and their requirements post-close are going to be very different than that of a private equity group. But we have had the privilege every year since I've been at Tusk to represent probably a handful in any given year that do go the direct private equity route versus selling to a strategic. But the majority of our clients do sell to an existing platform DSO, whether they're single location, or even sometimes, we've had 15 plus location businesses that ultimately, once they understand what's on the other side of a private equity deal, they elect to go with an existing business and kind of be tucked in or be entrepreneurial within the bigger DSO under their umbrella.
Yeah, I was talking to Vince Dilley from Platinum on a recent episode, and he was talking through the process that they had recently gone through, and I was asking him kind of why he had made the decision to have a private equity sponsor versus potentially affiliate with another DSO or make us or strategic. And his explanation I thought was great. He was like, look, we built a platform. And so we built a platform that can now fold in other practices. We have a model that works where, the funding and partnership with private equity allows us to accelerate that. When you're working with different organizations, what are the things to take into account where you might consider strategic versus private equity?
Ultimately, I would always start first and foremost with what their goals are what are their personal and professional goals? What do they want to get out of this? What are the economic factors that's going to drive, that's going to be weighted in a certain way? What is the floor versus what is the ceiling on a potential partnership, depending on if I go with the strategic? The likely ceiling for that is much lower, but the floor is much higher than going with a private equity group, meaning you can see the likelihood of you achieving a greater economic outcome in a shorter amount of time and a strategic versus a PE is pretty standard. And then what do you want to be in this next phase? Do you want to work more or work less? If you want to work less, it's likely a private equity group is not in the cards for you. It depends on what your role is in the business. If you've created a turnkey business where you're not the culture bearer and you're not, a key strategic element of the business, which is again unlikely, but if you have created such a business, you might be able to work less in selling to a private equity group. It's just not the norm. And I think a lot of folks, their identity is tied up in their business today. And what do they want their identity to be post-close, both within the business and within their broader community? Some folks are just striving to be a CEO of the biggest business they can possibly be, because that's an internal driver for them. And others, that's just not as big of something that they're looking to achieve. But I always try to start with what they want, and then I would advise them on what the business needs to look like in order to maximize the economic benefit to you if you go a private equity deal versus a strategic, mainly being around those administrative or centralized services that you do or don't have. Do you go out and invest in a call center? Do you not? Is that going to be, are you going to be rewarded in that, or are you not? Or what in terms of capital build out? What are you overbuilding, and you're not going to have an opportunity to get a return on those new operatories or that new location? And when do you want to go to market relative to the most recent acquisition or de novo that you built, in order to maximize your economic benefit, so that you don't feel like you're selling too early or selling too late?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess in some sense, it's almost like when you're selling a house. They talk about different things that you can do to the home to maximize the value. If you remodel the kitchen, there's generally a pretty good return on that investment. If you just spend a ton of money on this extra guest room that you have, like, that's not really going to move the needle very much when you're going to sell. So there's probably strategic approaches that you can take. I'd be curious, if you're a independent practice owner, you have one physical location, and you want to continue to practice dentistry for quite some time. You have some associates that work with you, but you do have a plan to sell the business strategic, and you'd like to fold in under a larger DSO. Would you ever recommend that somebody open additional practices? Is that something that could be a value maximizer prior to the sale, if they didn't have an urgent need to transact like right now? Or is that not something that, from like a long-term perspective, really moves the needle or increases multiples or anything else along those lines?
We get that question all the time. A lot of folks have already, purchased some real estate that they intended to build a location on, or they've had their eye on a strategic acquisition in the area. And it really does just depend, and you kind of have to pencil things out to find out what the ROI is. So you could, acquire something to get your second location, or you could build from scratch. And obviously the ROI on a de novo or building from scratch is a bit longer as a general rule, but there have been plenty of folks that have gone out and acquired a second location and have kind of torpedoed their golden goose, right? So what would it take to integrate that new location if you go out and acquire it? And at what cost could I potentially, take upon my golden goose of a business? Similarly, in a de novo, are you going to be outsourcing the general contractor, and who's going to be doing the permitting, and from a marketing perspective, like how well because there's no goodwill, there's no brand recognition, you're really trying to find a patient base from scratch. That's why the ROI on that takes a bit longer. So it really it depends. But I think the takeaway is a de novo, as a general rule, will take a longer time to produce a meaningful return. And if you acquire a business, doing your diligence is imperative to make sure you have made sure that you don't buy a poison pill for your business, whether it's cultural, the patient base isn't what you thought it was, the provider isn't who you thought they were, and how are these? Is it a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario or not? Because if it isn't, it makes it a little bit more of a difficult likelihood for success.
Now, it seems over the past few years that M&A has slowed down. I think there's data that supports this. However, when you look at certain organizations, even if it's slowed down, it has not stopped. You have, Heartland continues to acquire and affiliate with new practices. You've seen MB2 have a lot of expansion, over the last few years. What are some of the differentiators, as you see, between the groups that really kind of push the brakes on all of their acquisitions, and those that, even if they've slowed the pace, still have, continued to forge ahead with additional acquisitions. Is there anything that, any takeaways that you have when you're kind of just looking at the landscape in general that allows some to continue to acquire and others have decided to, take a step back?
Well, let's unpack what the pressures are on these platforms. Who are the folks that are really driving decision-making processes with respect to M&A? And it's really kind of two different but similar bodies, if you will. So you've got your investment committee that are ultimately assessing each one of these opportunities as they come in, and they are just having greater scrutiny. They're placing greater scrutiny on what they're doing. So if you can't get consensus within the investment committee on what assets they feel are, really additive from not only an EBITDA perspective, but also from a strategic perspective, because they're layering in more and more hurdles in order for them to give it that check. So you've got your investment committee that they have to come to terms with what the new business, I guess, ideal business that they want to go after looks like. And if they can't get on the same page around that, then you're never going to get consensus. So then it just kind of slows down. And then there's, well, who has the purse strings? So you got the private equity group and you've got the lender. Let's put those in the same bucket. So that's where you've got to understand what amount of leverage they're willing to put on the deal. Is that ultimately going to be competitive in the marketplace? Meaning, are you able to win deals? Or two, are they even going to give you the authority to write checks or put out offers because your same store sales or your EBITDA of your core business is declining because of the inflationary environment, operating headwinds, loss of key providers in the business, what have you? If their same store sales growth isn't, I guess, exciting for them, then they're not even going to allow you to put forth an LOI or close a deal. So those are the competing pressures that these groups have internally that they ultimately have to all get on the same page in order to be active. You could have the CEO saying that they want to go out here and do this. You could have all of the leadership and the board of directors all saying that, but if the investment committee and the private equity group and the bank can't get on the same page, then you're going to be at a standstill no matter how, the executives want to look at things.
So going back to, earlier in the conversation, you kind of painted the picture of the practices that are extracting the highest valuations today. Let's say you have a practice that's not that. What are the things that you recommend? Like, what levers can be pulled? Is there any low-hanging fruit, housekeeping that can be done to dress up the business to make it more attractive? Or like when it comes down to it, the fundamentals of how it's being run are the fundamentals, and there's not a lot that can be done to maximize prior to sale. How do you think about those levers? What's most important to focus on, and really, if there are things that can be done, what the advice would be?
Sure. So we always say you should build your business whether so it's built to sell whether you ever intend to sell it or not. And that's selling to a private practice doctor or selling to a DSO. There are some things that you can do in your business that will benefit you in the near term because you're the 100% owner of the business, and it's going to drive up what you take home on an annual basis. And when and if you decide to go to sell the business, if you're valuing the business based on EBITDA, it should be to your benefit because you're going to take a higher EBITDA to market and the multiple gets applied to that. They say necessity is the mother of all inventions. And I think technology has really, I think there's been a lot of great advancements in technology within the dental profession that folks need to take advantage of as a result of higher wages, higher expenses, and the inflationary environment that they faced in order to just get back to an EBITDA that they had in 2019, nonetheless one that's much higher. So that being leveraging AI from a clinical perspective in your diagnosis and your treatment presentation to get higher case acceptance. I think it's adding new technologies to your business that might be higher margin, leveraging technology that will allow you to do more advanced procedures than you otherwise would have, whether it be implants or orthodontics or what have you. And then there's also from an administrative or HR perspective, what resources can you look into from a revenue cycle management, a phone kind of phone tree, or a virtual assistant, virtual resources that exist out there that might help you combat this more difficult operating environment. They produce usually pretty quick returns on investment if you embrace it and you move forward and you get buy-in from the team and it doesn't sacrifice, patient care. I think that everybody needs to be looking into these because the DSOs are, and you could be more attract. One, they're out there doing it, so it's proof of concept. These are private equity-backed groups with very smart analysts on the backside. If they're committing hundreds of thousands of dollars, or in Heartland's case, when they went digital and bought Itero's, millions of dollars to these things, there has to be an ROI in there. You just need to figure out how you can get that ROI in your specific practice. So I think technology is number first and foremost, and it comes in a lot of different ways, whether it's clinical or administrative, or even I've been speaking with a group that they leverage AI to just take all of your kind of expenses from it, commercial insurance, waste management, janitorial services, any and all contracts you essentially have, telecom, and they run these invoices through AI to find out, waste and abuse that lives in your business that help, extract outcomes for you that are beneficial from that perspective. So it comes in all forms, and you don't have to do everything at once, but you would be kidding yourself if you weren't out there actively taking some of your time to manage and work on the business rather than just in the business.
Yeah, important to understand the tools and technologies that are out there that can be applied to improving what you're doing. Almost it's a responsibility that every business owner should have, staying relevant and up to date. So switching from the M&A piece and in the same vein of staying relevant and up to date for yourself, the market's changing a lot. There's the dental itself is new technologies, innovations happening fast. How do you stay up to date? Where do you go to learn and to stay current?
It's been great working at Tusk for as long as I have. We just have a really great professional network of, CPAs, attorneys, consultants, all outside of Tusk that we feel like we are very collaborative with. What conferences are you going to? How can we get together? I just got back from AADGP, and we spoke with Dykema and CLA, the three of us, combined to do a conference. So I would say our professional network is how we stay up to date. And I think, doctors listening here should be reaching out to their peers, joining study clubs, attending conferences. There are a lot of great conferences out there, a lot of great webinars, a lot of great podcasts such as this that are out there So I think being a forever learner, it's one of our core values is being, a forever learner. It's benefited us both from a networking perspective, but it also is good to hear from some groups that are struggling, right? It's good to talk to a DSO that used to be really active as a buyer for us, and to just have a relationship with them, to be able to pick up the phone and get an honest read from as much as they're willing to share, to get a good indication of what's going on in their world, and then taking that and passing that information along to our clients so we can tell them, look, what these groups are experiencing is probably not too dissimilar from yourself. It might be cold comfort, but the operating environment's real. So kind of a long-winded answer, but I would to sum it up, it's our professional network, which can be replicated if you're a provider or a business or operators in the service industry like we are, or just consuming all the great content that is out there in the ether from webinars and podcasts. There's never been a more abundance of that. And then also getting outside of the echo chamber of dental specifically, and getting more broadly, whether it's Becker's Healthcare, or even going more broadly, some of these other podcasts for entrepreneurs and founders out there, really does help keep people kind of elevate out of the fray.
Having forever learning, is that how you framed it? What was the as one of the core values is really cool. That's neat. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people on this podcast now, and that is not a common core value, but there's so much value to actually practicing that for sure. What makes you the most bullish about dentistry moving forward? Like, what are some of the things that, you look at this industry, you look at the market, where you say, you know what, these are some tailwinds that are probably going to help us out here in the near term or maybe over the next few years?
So I think COVID, coupled on the tails of COVID, one of the most difficult operating environments that dentistry has ever seen, from the Great Resignation to hygienists, with hourly wages, and a new generation of doctor coming to the market to be associates in the business, and what they're looking for from a work-life balance and the clinical training that they've had. Just really one of the most difficult operating environments on the tails of COVID. It really shined a bright light in a dark place in a lot of these DSO businesses. And the unfortunate truth is some of them will not survive. Some of the DSO 1.0 that came out and didn't structure their deals in such a way that there's a lot of risk sharing post-close, they just might not survive. They might have to be sold for parts. They might be sold back to the doctors in the practices. There's going to be some tough learnings from those businesses, but I do think that the businesses that have been formed and thrived through that 2020 and beyond, and those businesses that have been formed post 2020, are really set up to succeed for the long term. I think they've taken a lot of learnings from that DSO 1.0, 2.0, and are starting to apply it to this model. And I think that, coupled with technology, we're really going to be building sustainable businesses, not just stacking EBITDA. So I think hearing what the value proposition and the strategic goals are for a lot of the DSOs that we speak with that are active today, they're building ecosystems. They care more about 1 + 1 = 3 when they're looking at deals. And I think that that's setting up for success, both for the doctors that partner with these groups, the investors that are behind these groups, and hopefully, for the patients that these groups collectively serve. I think it should be creating a better environment for, dental to be a bigger part of the broader healthcare system. And, you're hearing it all the time, like that dentistry is getting more and more, I guess, headlines in the world of broader healthcare, and how important dental healthcare is to overall healthcare and wellness. And that awareness, I think, is going to increase the pie for all dental businesses. I think the supply of patients will increase as a result of just being more proactive about their overall health and understanding how dental fits into that.
Very well said. Do you think there's any diminishment of the appetite from private equity as it relates to the dental industry?
I don't know what the next shiny penny is, and I think dental is more than just a shiny penny. I think it's been proven to be a very, very solid investment and sound investment for stewards of the businesses that know what they're doing. And there even is a lot of room for error. There's a lot of groups out there that probably had no business being an investor, a private equity group in the dental space, but because there was so much opportunity in the field, that they were successful, and they got in, got out, and moved on. I mean, we hear a lot of these private equity sponsors that had dental investments that are moving on into healthcare, moving on into med-aesthetics, moving on into dermatology, moving on into veterinary and all these other things. The total addressable market in dental is still more than med-aesthetics, dermatology, plastic surgery combined, probably by a factor of 3. So it's still bigger, and it still has a bigger opportunity than some of those other environments. So I think it will continue to be a place that attracts new private equity groups, or private equity groups on their second or third investment into dental, for at least another 5 to 10 years. But I will say that there's certainly been a little bit of a less inbound from our perspective of groups knocking down our door, trying to get access to our pipeline to get their first investment into dental. It has slowed down a bit, but that isn't necessarily a mark on dental as much as it is probably the broader M&A environment that you talked about earlier.
All right. So recently, you've been on a panel at AADGP. I know you've been participating in some different publications, articles. Is there anything that, we haven't really hit on here today, that's something that, you're passionate about or you want to make sure that people are aware of that we haven't discussed?
I think I probably kind of alluded to it here, but it is kind of the headline of the dental economics article I have coming out with you guys in a couple months that we just kind of putting a bow on now. I think the disparity between the DSOs that are going to make it and the DSOs that aren't has never been broader, and making sure that reverse diligence is done on those buyers to ensure that you set yourself up for the best potential economic outcome. I think that I talked about it. There's some groups that might be broken up or sold for parts or sold back to the doctors that initially sold to them. And relinquish them back to private practice. Our job is to make sure that folks don't get into that situation with one of those groups. There are things, within our control, without, out of our control. But all that to be said, there's still active buyers out there that I have no faith in their ability to get to the next recapitalization event, and they put on a good face and they're household names. But just I think awareness of that needs to be double clicked on rather.
Are there any red flags that you could share or anything that people should, when you talk about doing that reverse diligence, is that a hard thing to do? I mean, I would imagine it's easier if you're engaged with an organization like yourself who can help guide somebody through that and also has your finger on the pulse of all of these groups that are in the marketplace and has information already related to that. If somebody is already in a process or something else, what are some of the things that, questions they should be asking?
Yeah, I think a good red flag would be number of years from the time that the inception of their platform to where they are today. So there's a stat out there in PitchBook. So there are 37 private equity backed dental platforms that are greater than 5 years removed from their initial investment. And for those that are familiar with private equity cycles, their goal is to get their deal done in 5 years or less.
So they've been in the fund for a long time.
Yep, they've been in the fund for a long time. Like MB2, the recapping in like every less than 3 years when they were, moving along, and some of the other more established and successful groups, never made it to the 5 years. They got their deal done well before that. And then of the 37 that are greater than 5, 17 of them are greater than 7 years into their hold period. So if you haven't made it to the finish line in 7 years, that's certainly a red flag. So that's kind of the easiest non-negotiable. They can't refute that. That information is out there in ether that they can't really kind of hide behind. Other things that you might want to ask them, they could kind of talk their way around. But I'd say if there's one data point that I would be acutely focused on when I'm interviewing or trying to vet a potential buyer is where are they in that life cycle?
Great advice. Ryan, where can people find you, or how can people find you? How can people find Tusk? Share any contact information that the audience would be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, sure. So our website's pretty comprehensive. Tusk Practice Sales, there's opportunities to fill out forms to get in touch with us based on a specific topic, whether it be, you want to be a buyer of our clients' businesses or on our buy side list, or you want to receive a complimentary valuation study and just start a conversation. You can go directly to our website, tuskpracticesales.com. Additionally, if you want to drop an email to info@tuskpracticesales, we'll get back to you in just a few short hours to ultimately go through what next steps would be to find out how we can connect. But, it's never too early to start a conversation. We work with folks for sometimes years before they ever become a client. And sometimes even at the end of that 2-year, 3-year journey of being connected with them, they ultimately elect that the pathway that we take our clients through is not for them. And that is absolutely okay, because every dentist knows a couple other dentists. So we're happy to take those conversations and kind of just market through education, if you will.
Perfect. Ryan, thank you so much for joining. This is a lot of really great, really helpful information. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.